Chapter 7 talks about cognitive function or intelligence. And this is really a controversial subject, I have to tell you. People have so many questions and disagreements over this. We've been talking about intelligence for at least 100 years now, and there's been a lot of controversy surrounding it. One of the questions people often ask is intelligence more inherited or is it more environmental? I mean, is it something you got from your parents or is it something from the environment and your upbringing and all of that? And I have to tell you, experts really don't agree upon that. One of the main studies that points to the heritability factor is the Minnesota twin study, where they studied a large number of twins who had been adopted out into different families in infancy and didn't even meet one another until perhaps they were older later in life. And they found that these children, their IQ and other personality traits were more similar to their natural sibling, to their natural identical twin, than it was to the siblings they were reared with their whole life. And other personality factors were also more similar to their natural twin than the family that they were reared with. And so that study really does kind of point to the heritability factor. The other idea is that it's the environment. If you provide an enriched environment for children to grow up in, you talk to them, you play with them, you read to them, you play music for them, they're going to be more intellectually advantaged than children who are not provided those opportunities. And I think we all know today, most of us all agree, that there is some contribution coming from both. Yes, your genes do give you some of your talents and abilities, but your environment plays a huge role also. And we also know that the brain you're born with isn't necessarily going to stay the same throughout life. So if you're born with a certain brain and you're provided with an enriched environment, not only do you learn more, but your brain changes, your brain grows. And after all, the environment's the only thing we can really do anything about anyway, so we may as well focus on that. Okay, so another question that people oftentimes ask is, what is the nature of intelligence? What is intelligence? Is it just one global something that if you have more of it, it helps you out in life, or if you have less of it, you're having more struggles? Or are there many kinds of intelligence, and you could have a lot of some and not much of others? Well, even the experts don't agree about this. Some of them say it's global, and some of them say that it is specific. I'm not really sure what I believe. I could kind of argue for either one. I'm not really sure which one of those I believe is true. But anyway, Gardner was a person who said there are 8 different kinds of intelligences. Some people say there are even many more than that. But the 8 that he included was verbal skills. And I think we all know that that's important, to be able to communicate effectively with others. Another kind of intelligence he mentioned was mathematical skills, to be able to use whatever math you need to get around in the world. And of course, some people are brilliant mathematicians, very good in that area. Another kind of intelligence he mentioned was spatial perception, being able to understand 3-dimensional objects in space. And of course, architects and engineers are particularly good at that. Another one he mentioned then is bodily kinesthetic intelligence, being able to understand your own body in space. Baryshnikov, the famous Russian ballerina, or other famous athletes certainly would have wonderful kinesthetic intelligence. Some have said, is that really intelligence, or is that something else like endurance or balance or strength? I don't know, but I do know that Gardner thought it was a kind of intelligence. Another kind of intelligence that he also included was musical intelligence. Now, rarely on an intelligence test are there musical kinds of things where they play different tones and see if you can discriminate the difference. But Gardner thought that was a kind of intelligence. And I have seen some little tiny children that actually could carry a perfect tune, and I have seen some full-grown adult professors, in fact, who couldn't even sing Happy Birthday. They're so far off pitch, I'm thinking, dude, can't you hear yourself? And so clearly some people have more musical intelligence than others, but we also know that that's something you can learn. All right, and so then another kind of intelligence he called intrapersonal. That is understanding yourself, your own motivations, your own emotions, and so on. And finally, the last one he included was interpersonal intelligence. That is social skills. And I think that is one that is not very often tested on regular intelligence tests, but I think it's very important. You know, you could be a very good student, but if you're a klutz when it comes to getting along with others, you may have a problem out there in the real working world and whatnot, in interpersonal relationships. Okay, so that's one thing we all talk about, is what is intelligence, and what are the kinds of intelligence, and can you measure it, or how do you measure it? Those are all important questions. What I would encourage you to do, though, if you've ever taken an intelligence test, you can use that to look at things where you might have strengths, or things where you might, you know, have some challenges where you want to focus a little bit more of your attention and work a little harder. But I would never use an intelligence test to sum up all of what you are intellectually. You could never, ever test that on a single test. And so please don't run around the rest of your life thinking that's what I am because I took that test. All right. Now, if we're talking about intelligence tests, they've been around, as I said, for 100 years, a little over, actually. And Simon and Binet designed the original intelligence test back in France. The government of France asked Binet to design a test so that they could identify what children were at risk for failure, so that they could give them special help in school. And so his goal originally was very noble. And so he tried to design a test where you weren't testing academic type things, but rather you were testing knowledge that you should have learned just being out there in the real world, like telling the difference between, oh, I don't know, a fly or a butterfly, or, you know, other things, you know, just all kinds of questions. Can you make change at the store? Just basic things you should have learned in real life. Many people say, though, that it's impossible to separate knowledge you learned in life and academic knowledge because they overlap so much. But anyway, he tried to design this test going from 2 years old all the way up to superior adults. Well, I don't know if he's testing academic skills or if he's testing things you should have learned in life. But what I do know is that people's scores tend to be really consistent over time. You know, if they score at a pretty certain level when they're 2, they probably score about that same level when they're 6, when they're 10, when they're 20. Whatever it is he's testing, people do score pretty consistently over time. And we know that certainly Binet's test doesn't test all of intellectual capabilities, but it does test verbal skills and a few other things. All right, so anyway, then, so that's Binet's test. But then this other test is called Wechsler's test. And that test is particularly nice because one of the complaints about most intelligence tests, including Binet's test, is that it relies too heavily upon verbal skills. And if you don't share the dominant culture, or maybe English isn't your first language, you know, then those questions that have to do with words are going to be particularly difficult for you. And so the test may be biased against you, and your score may not represent your actual intelligence. And so Wechsler's test actually divides the test in two. Half of the test is still verbal type questions, but fully half of the test has nothing to do with words. It's matching numbers and symbols and putting pictures in serial order and other kinds of things. And so at the end of his test, you get a verbal score and a performance score, and then you get a total overall score. So that test tends to be a little popular because of the performance section. Also, Wechsler's test tends to be popular because he has separate tests for adults and children, the WAIS for adults and the WISC for children. All right, that's all I'm going to cover today on intelligence. You should look at your chapter for further information on levels of intelligence and giftedness and mental retardation and other things. Go ahead and read your book to find out some of those other things, and refer to your study guide for extra words.